Chapter 55, Field of View. Rest of April was a politically tense time for Harry. The Slytherins didn't let up on their whisper campaign that Harry had deliberately killed all the prisoners in Azkaban. Some of them even seemed legitimately angry about it, rather than simply trying to score points against the boy who lived. Just when he thought they might be winding down, some reporter for the Daily Prophet named Rita Skeeter started investigating the story, which seemed to mean creating a forum for anyone with an axe to grind. As long as she was just quoting the conspiracy theories of other people, she couldn't personally be held to libel standards. Not that the wizarding world had much in the way of libel laws. Dumbledore was actually the focus of most of the articles, rather than Harry, as the one that had led the trip and then been soundly defeated by an ancient dark wizard. Even if the old man had been inclined to provide no comment to the press, Dawlish knew enough to share with his superiors, and then the ministry leak machine really got started. Among the fanciful explanations for what had happened, the paper did have the core facts that Harry knew the password to a secret door in the prison that nobody else had ever found. They descended without calling for Aura backup, even after discovering a room full of Inferi. And then the greatest wizard of the age had been soundly defeated, with Harry somehow bringing down the prison afterwards. They manifestly didn't print that the country had definitely been saved from a centuries-old dark wizard. After all, there was no remaining proof that Echrisdes had been anything other than an unknown opportunist that had found a back door into the prison and made use of the hidden resources there. And had Harry actually defeated him, or made a deal to let him escape, and then brought down the prison to cover his tracks? The veiled personal attacks had big enough holes to drive the night bus through, which was probably why the population wasn't more irate. After all, finding an ancient evil and defeating it all on his own, while the adults did nothing, was the plotline of basically all of the fictional young Harry Potter stories that everyone had been reading to their kids since the early 80s. Wizards weren't much for common sense, but Arkham's razor did suggest that. Harry Potter discovered a secret threat in Azkaban and narrowly defeated it, was the simplest explanation. Plus, there was a widespread rumor that Harry had also killed a basilisk earlier in the year, and there was even proof of that. But the populace was still fickle, especially at school. Harry had avoided getting ostracized all year by not revealing he was a Parselmouth during an ongoing monster attack, so maybe it was just pent-up desire to tear down their celebrities. By early May, Slytherin was fully against him. At least a quarter of Ravenclaw was looking for some kind of justice for Mr. McDougal and a few other small-time criminals that were relatives to members of the House. And even Hufflepuff had its members that specifically weren't talking to Harry and might be quietly harboring some kind of resentment. And with the Quidditch match against the Badger House coming up, Ron and Lee were of the opinion that Harry needed to do some kind of damage control. In the current climate, instantly getting the snitch, or worse, getting it after running up the score, might fully turn Hufflepuff against him. But is this the only actual way? Harry worried, as the marauders walked toward the empty classroom they'd picked. The Quibbler has been completely fair to you when no other paper has, Lee shrugged. And the reporter is friendly, which counts for a lot. They think that he prevented an explosion of dark magic gum disease, Hermione countered, having had a crash course in the whimsical zine. They've been trying to get ministry employees to track their dental health to prove that the threat has been defeated. You should get your parents to help with that study, Ron joked. Anyway, too late now. We're here. Seated with a view of the door was one Luna Lovegood. Rather than sitting at one of the tables in the room and using it as a writing surface, she was awkwardly perched on the table, with some parchment on a book precariously balanced on her knee. Even with Harry's maxed-out agility and nearly maxed finesse, he wasn't certain he could hold that pose for long. Harry James Potter, 12, Luna started, without preamble, though she wasn't really looking their way. This interview is on the record. You please start us off with a quote about whether you believe Sirius Black is currently hiding out under the identity of Stubby Boardman, former singer for the Hobgoblins. Hermione Granger replies, You agreed to this. I don't really know who that is, Harry said, dragging one of the other tables over and sitting on the edge so he'd be at eye level with Luna. I can tell you that I think Sirius Black was probably framed. Obviously, he hasn't come after me. Turns out he never got a trial. Interesting, she said, furiously scribbling the quote to the best of her ability in what was either some kind of shorthand or just her handwriting becoming very messy as she tried to write quickly. In your adventures, have you ever encountered a crumple-horned snorkack, umgubular slashgulter, blibbering humdinger, or any variety of heliopath? Not that I know of, he shrugged. But if I do, I'll tell you as soon as I can. Acceptable, she agreed, making another note. Suddenly shifting gears, she finally looked directly at him and asked, "Who was it that you fought in Azkaban?" Reply to Hermione Granger. Maybe this will go okay after all. Dumbledore had been reticent to spread the information around, but had grudgingly agreed that it was Harry and the Marauder's quest and his decision what to tell the public. Thus, Harry simply explained, he was called Ecrisdes. We think he was the dark wizard that built Azkaban in the first place. He certainly looked like he'd been down there for centuries. To her credit, Harry could glance over and see that Luna had actually slowed down to make sure she spelled the name correctly in the rest of the incomprehensible handwriting. Apologies. I don't have a dictaquill, she said, after taking the better part of a minute actually writing all of what he'd said down. Please describe him for our readers. Harry gamely began to describe the lick, realizing that he needed to speak slowly and leave pauses for the younger girl to catch up as he went. He finished the description with, "But he was fast for all of that. He only beat the headmaster because he was so quick and surprised him." "And you said his teeth were very white?" she asked, consulting her writing. "At least it seemed that way. Maybe it was because he was all dried out." She just nodded, underlining that passage but not following up further. Instead, she asked, "And why did the prison come down?" It turned out the basement of the building was full of all this machinery. You see, Ecrisdes was crazy and thought he was going to fly the tower into space, and he was going to use explosions that might have wiped out Britain and most of Northern Europe. At the end of the interview, Harry felt like he'd gotten all the major points out. He'd told the truth, though he'd continued to leave out the game system. He'd also really downplayed Remus being there. For whatever reason, the Daily Prophet hadn't mentioned him either, and being a secret werewolf meant he was happy to keep it that way. Luna looked like she had some idea that Harry was skirting certain subjects, but decided not to press, at least in her role as reporter. After about 20 minutes of talking and several feet of barely legible parchment, she decided, "My hand hurts. I'll send this to Daddy, and we'll see if it makes the paper. Thank you for advancing British journalism, Harry Potter." She then rolled up her report and wandered out of the classroom. Out of some strange professionalism, she hadn't acknowledged any of the other marauders while they were there. Not even Ginny. The short interview left Harry a couple of hours to check the library. In the weeks since the spring holidays, he'd mostly been going back to all of the books he'd been unable to use because he wasn't at Newt level. Was he going to get much use out of a few points in magical artwork and alchemy without even a third year's grasp of the practicals of runes and arithmancy? Maybe not. Was he going to need the couple of points he'd gotten in occlumency from the books Remus and Sirius had sent with his maxed-out willpower? It was too early to tell. Was he excited about the smattering of points he'd gotten in his Newt-level class skills, particularly the point in combat magic? Definitely. Unfortunately, the dwindling number of shelves he hadn't gotten to yet were yielding fewer and fewer results. In the 20 of them he'd managed to get through since crossing into Newt skills, he'd picked up another rank of conversational French and 2 more ranks of basic creature harvesting. The library had seemed so vast at the beginning of the year, but now he was looking down the barrel of 5 more years of school without any skill books. He'd have to learn things the way everyone else did. He was entering his 3rd year with the skills of a genius 6th year, but still, would he even be able to get skill-ups from class for the next few years? Fortunately, he didn't have to think too much about that or the impending Quibbler article due to Oliver Wood's crushing last-minute practices. Despite the 210 points they'd racked up against Gryffindor in the first match of the year, Slytherin had lost to both Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff once everyone was on Nimbus 2001's. The minister had come through on improving the school brooms, so they were only at 370 points for the year. Hufflepuff had won their match against Slytherin, but lost against Ravenclaw, and were only at 240 points for the year before going up against Gryffindor. But Ravenclaw had won both their matches and were sitting at 380 points before their final match with Gryffindor, and Gryffindor had only the 30 points they'd scored before the Dementors showed up. T's still doable, Oliver Wood insisted. Harry gets TH snitch in both matches, but only after we've got 60 points off Hufflepuff, and we gotta meet Ravenclaw goal for goal. Angelina frowned, considering the math. So draw it out. Make sure Hufflepuff Seeker doesn't get the snitch while we rack up as many points as we can. It's okay if they get some points too, as long as we win. I can't just get the snitch as fast as possible, Harry asked, trying to rack up points having backfired against him in his last match. No way we're picking up 60 points over Ravenclaw, she confirmed. We're probably better, but they're still good. But you can get the snitch right away against Ravenclaw, George figured. And you should. In case we're not better, Fred smirked at Angelina. Hush, you. Go hit some bludgers, she joked back. The new Quibbler came out on Friday, and Luna had ensured that Harry got a copy. The article took up 2 pages of the magazine-shaped newspaper and was remarkably free of editorializing or quote-picking. That is, it basically told the story in a way that lined up with the facts that Harry had explained in the interview. It featured a number of sidebars where Luna's father had cross-referenced things Harry had said with fanciful theories like the Rotfang conspiracy, Grindelwald lives, Death Eaters literally eat death, corpuscular petards, Zobberdemerung, and prison Nagel infections. But the article itself was straightforward and factual. Thus, on that Saturday, enough kids were talking about Harry's version of what happened that he could check his faction scores and see that he'd gone back to at least neutral with the Hufflepuffs and Ravenclaws. That would have to do. They had no way of knowing that, with the Basilisk defeated months earlier, there was not going to be a last-minute petrification to get Gryffindor out of the final 2 matches. If they didn't win the cup this year, it would all be on them, and of course, on the Dementors and Draco's poor sportsmanship. Fortunately, similar bad behavior didn't seem likely from the Hufflepuff Seeker. After losing to Ravenclaw in their first match, the upperclassman that Harry had played against the previous year had gone ahead and quit the team to focus on his newt studies. The replacement Seeker was Cedric Diggory, a 4th year that the twins and Lee said was a good bloke. He'd already beaten Draco to the snitch in the match against Slytherin, so Harry was wary. Nice day for it, Cedric said, conversationally, as he hovered near Harry above the pitch. He wasn't exaggerating. It was maybe the best day for Quidditch Harry had seen during a match yet. Brilliant sunshine and a refreshing breeze played across the grounds. Harry was keeping a wary eye on the snitch using his map and marking Cedric just in case the older boy spotted it before Harry was ready. Gryffindor was already at 20 to Hufflepuff's 10, even a few minutes into the match. It sure is, he agreed. Might just watch the game for a while. Cedric chuckled. I know your team needs to run up the score. Mine does too. Whichever of us gets the snitch stands a good chance of getting the cup. Assuming we shut out Ravenclaw, Harry countered, pleased that Cedric didn't seem like he'd make a dash for the snitch to end the game before Gryffindor had time to rack up 60 points. There is that. They have a new Seeker this year, too. She was a lot faster than me. He considered for a second and noted, is it weird that you're basically the senior Seeker at this point? You're the only one that played last year. I only got to play 2 matches, though, Harry demurred. Probably off fighting some other evil and had to miss, huh? Cedric joked. Well, yeah, Harry shrugged. Quirrell was possessed by Voldemort. He glanced over to make sure Cedric didn't fall off his broom at the unconscious twitch purebloods seemed to have at the mention of the name, and I wound up fighting him. I beat him, but it knocked me out through the match. You aren't even kidding, are you? The older boy marveled. My mum used to read me those stories about you, growing up. Those are fake. My life started to get weird as soon as I got to Hogwarts. Cedric just looked at him consideringly for a minute, then said, heck of a thing. They hovered in silence for a few more minutes until he pointed out, well, that's 60 for your team and 40 for us. I think I'm going to go ahead and try to close this out if you don't mind. Nope. Suits me. Thanks, Harry nodded, and gave a small grin as Cedric waved and chose exactly the wrong direction to fly off to start searching for the snitch. Letting the older boy get enough of a lead that he wouldn't have much chance to catch up, Harry let himself drift in the direction of the snitch on his map. As soon as he was ready, he tilted his broom around and pointed it straight at the targeting brackets that showed exactly where the snitch was, floating not far above the Slytherins in the stands. As he bore down on it, he sent an idle glance to see that Draco had clearly already seen it and was shouting in fury. But he couldn't hear the boy over the roar of the crowd and Lee's announcement, "Harry Potter's seen the snitch." There really was a definite amount of extra power on the Nimbus 2001. Harry regretted that he was having to pretend his Nimbus 2000 was destroyed, but he didn't hate the extra boost on the new broom. Diggory tries to correct, but he's half a pitch away. Potter's diving. The snitch had started to shoot downward, and Harry had to make use of his dodging skills to avoid colliding with a chaser and getting hit by a bludger that one of the Hufflepuff beaters had sent his way. He wound up clapping his hand around the golden ball and pulling up just in time to avoid having to tumble on the dirt. It looks like Potter has the snitch. Show it, Harry. He does. Gryffindor wins. The crowd was roaring as Harry brandished the snitch and floated back up toward the announcer's box. That's 210 to 40. It's still anyone's chance at the Quidditch Cup in a month. Well, except Slytherin's. No matter how powerful he was getting from the game system, it turned out nothing beat the feeling of winning a Quidditch match. Harry could tell he was grinning like a maniac. How much better would the feeling be if he could win the whole cup in a month? Chapter 56. Random Encounter. After the Quidditch match, Hogwarts fully entered the countdown to exams. Hermione was strangely chilled out about it, compared to the previous year. Between her nearly photographic memory from Intelligence 20, Harry's ability to do practical work at a newt level, and Ron actually doing well in classes from his own points put into intelligence and time in the library, she didn't have as much fear of them doing badly. She still overprepared. It just wasn't nearly as intense as what she did for first year. Consequently, she didn't immediately freak out when Harry revealed he had to miss the study session she'd scheduled for their Tuesday afternoon, midway through May. Tuesdays only had classes in the first 2 periods for the second-year Gryffindors and an afternoon optional flying period, so it made up the bulk of their library time. Why? She asked simply, expecting her time to be stolen by Wood cutting his own classes to drill the Quidditch team. Harry shrugged. Dumbledore wants me to go on a field trip, and Remus and Sirius said it was worth it. I imagine he'll explain on the way. He went straight to the old man's office after second period history and gave the candy-themed password of the day. The whole thing seemed rather unnecessary, given that the gargoyle was clearly intelligent enough to pass word that a guest had arrived, and then move when the headmaster ordered it. Probably someone trying to sneak in by listing off the names of all the candies they could think of would find that there were additional lines of defense. Ah, excellent timing, Harry, Dumbledore said as he walked into the office. On his perch in the room, the headmaster's phoenix, Fawkes, had finally reached a beautiful young adulthood after his rebirth earlier in the year. I thought we might pop over to London for lunch and to introduce you to some colleagues. Sir, Harry simply asked. The old man gave a wry smile at his enjoyment of being cryptic, but admitted, I hate to worry you, but I've received information that worries me. Suffice it to say, I think we may need to accelerate our pursuit of objects similar to the diary and diadem. In addition to trying to organize some allies, I believe that the old headmaster of Slytherin may have information he could share about how young Tom learned to make the objects in the first place, and I hope some clue as to how many he planned to make. Harry just nodded, but asked, Why do you need me? Horace is, well, fond of being seen as a mentor to the best and the brightest. He will likely be very keen to make your acquaintance. Ah, a fan, Harry grumbled. More a maven, if you will, Dumbledore corrected. He prides himself on being well-connected and helping connect others to their best benefit. Perhaps he enjoys the reflected fame too much, but he does provide a valuable service. If all Slytherins bent their cunning in such a way as to help others while helping themselves, we'd be the better for it as a society. Okay, so meet this guy and be nice. Do I ask him about the Horcruxes or you? Should we bring Ron or Lee? 20 charisma might really help here. A fair point, but sadly I think he would have to spend extended time with either of them before he cared enough about their opinions for their question to land. Perhaps if I need to extend an offer of employment to get him to open up, they'll have next year to work on him, but I'm rather hoping that we can simply get the answer. What would he teach? Harry checked. He was the old potions master. I vote we hire him, the headmaster sighed. I rather thought your relationship with Severus had improved. He's been less awful since I started turning imperfect potions, Harry admitted. Well, honestly, Remus isn't keen to test the curse, and Severus has wanted a chance to demonstrate his understanding of the dark arts. But let's call that Plan B, shall we? I might still see fit to rehire Horace, but I'd rather not wait months for this key information. Got it, Harry agreed. Very well, shall we? Oh, please be ready to don your cloak when we emerge. It wouldn't be ideal to be seen letting underage students out to lunch on a school day. Harry nodded again, ready to swap his cloak on as soon as he exited the flue, and really hoping his maxed-out agility would prevent the falls he'd had the first few times he'd traveled through a fireplace. Dumbledore waved his wand. He was no longer using the Elder Wand, but a sleeker one that was likely his own original bonded wand, to open the flue, and waited for Harry to proceed. Diagon Alley, Harry enunciated clearly this time, as he stepped into the green flame after throwing in the powder. The trip through the fire was just as harrowing as the first couple of journeys, and he still sprawled on the floor of the leaky cauldron as he exited. At least his agility allowed him to immediately spring back to his feet. He didn't think anyone had really seen him as he threw the cloak from his inventory onto his cloak slot. Dumbledore appeared behind him in moments, gracefully stepping free of the fire with nary a hint of being off balance. Harry was jealous. Ah, headmaster, Tom the barman called. Thought something might be wrong with the fire. Could have sworn it flared double. I didn't notice any issues on my end, the old man elided, seeming to have a sense of where Harry was despite the cloak. Harry still hadn't figured out how he was pulling off that trick. Staying for lunch. Rush hasn't started quite yet. Tom gestured to the bar, which was basically empty. Afraid not, Tom. Having a quick meeting in the alley. Well, good luck to you then, sir, Tom allowed, going back to puttering at the back where he was preparing food in heaping quantities for the patrons sure to start flowing in soon. They walked out the pub's back door, and Dumbledore negligently traced the bricks of the wall that caused it to open into the alley proper. Not even glancing back to be sure Harry was following, the old man walked at a sedate pace about halfway down, stopping at Nocturne Alley. Well, stopping for the ice cream parlor, it turned out. Albus Dumbledore replies. Florian Fortescue has been experimenting with a small gourmet restaurant. The ice cream cuisinier himself showed Dumbledore upstairs. Harry had assumed the upper floors were all living space, but he followed the two men into a level that had been converted into small dining rooms, and into the one overlooking the alley. Already seated in the fairly intimate dining room, recently redone in a fairly modern style, especially for Wizarding Britain, were a witch and wizard. She was a dark-haired woman that was probably several years older than Sirius, her features forgettable, especially in the face of her vibrant green shawl. He was dark-skinned and bald, and likely a few years younger than the original Marauders. Emmeline Vance, Duelist, Level 13 Order of the Phoenix, Globus Mundi, Gryffindor, Kingsley Shacklebolt Aura, Level 12 Order of the Phoenix, Ministry of Magic, Gryffindor. We are expecting two more guests, Florian, Dumbledore explained. If you could show Horace up when he arrives, it would be appreciated. I imagine the last will find his own way. Albus Dumbledore replies, I felt it wouldn't hurt to build your mystique. You can reveal yourself when he leaves. As soon as Fortescue had left and closed the door behind himself, Harry moved the cloak back into his inventory. Miss Vance, Aura Shacklebolt, he greeted the two. To their credit, neither even flinched at the boy who lived, suddenly materializing in the room. Pleased to make your acquaintance, Vance nodded. Mr. Potter, Shacklebolt acknowledged, simply, clearly assuming that Harry could pick up most of the context about the two members of his order from their tags. The headmaster explained, Emmeline graduated a few years earlier than your parents and was one of my staunchest allies in the war. Kingsley had not graduated before the end of hostilities, but has been of great help watching for signs of renewed problems in the intervening years. And my participation might not be theoretical for much longer, the Auror asked. Sadly, no, but let us sit. Harry, my boy, please inform us if Florian is about to enter or if our guest has arrived. Harry nodded and took the seat next to Vance that Dumbledore gestured at. The old man himself sat between the two Order members, leaving the last chair to sit between Harry and Shacklebolt. It gave Harry a good look out of the window onto both Diagon and nocturne alleys, but he understood that the implication was for him to watch his map and make sure nobody overheard secrets. Trying to figure out how much information to parcel out as he settled himself, the headmaster finally explained. Voldemort's shade infiltrated Hogwarts last year, possessing poor Quirinus. While that attempt at rejuvenating himself was foiled by Harry and his friends, I have intelligence that he may have found another route. To wit, the dark marks that had faded upon the Death Eaters are regaining their color. Severus, Vance rolled her eyes. I still don't know how you convinced him to spy for you. Snape was a Death Eater, Harry blurted out. As soon as he said it, it made perfect sense, but he still reserved the right to be offended. Alas, that some poor choices in youth cannot be easily undone, Dumbledore shrugged. Seeming slightly annoyed that Vance had clued Harry and Shacklebolt in on his spy, he explained, but he has confirmed with others that it isn't just him. The tattoo that denotes his allegiance had faded upon Voldemort's apparent demise, but has recently darkened. Macnair and the Carrows, Harry put together. That's what they were talking about over the winter halls. Their tattoos were darkening too. Just so, the old man furiously covered, Harry not having informed him of that particular encounter, but wanting to seem like he had already known about it. Walden Macnair, Shacklebolt asked, having encountered the man at the ministry. Number never mind. That makes perfect sense. Neither he nor Vance seemed at all surprised that the Carrow siblings were Death Eaters. I do not yet know how he is returning, the headmaster explained with some reticence, but my suspicion is that it may be the doing of Peter Pettigrew, who was the spy within our ranks, he explained to Vance. Sirius Black is innocent and is currently helping us along with Remus Lupin. That also makes sense, she shrugged, the elaborate green scarf flexing with the gesture. And thus, my goal today is to get Horace to reveal any information he might have, as Tom Riddle's old head of house, about the mechanism by which Voldemort's return is possible, Dumbledore concluded. It turned out to be perfectly timed, as a new dart had entered the store and Fortescue started moving with it in their direction. They're coming, Harry warned. Right this way, sir, Fortescue was saying, as he opened the door into the small dining room and ushered in a tremendously fat man with a bald head and mustache almost as expansive as his gut. Harry was certain he must be a walrus animagus. Horace Slughorn, Potioneer / Magister, level 17. Slughorn Apothecarium, European Potioneers, Slytherin, this is your entire party. Fortescue confirmed, seemingly only slightly nonplussed at Harry being present. He covered whatever shark he had with handing out menus. I'll have water brought up shortly. Please take your time with the menu. I hope I'm only fashionably late, Slughorn said, settling himself into the empty chair. Barely even that, Horace, Dumbledore waved off. You're right on time. The rest of us were early. Excellent, then, the former potions professor said, his waistcoat straining against his bulk as he settled himself. I'm pleased Florian listened to my advice that he could do so much more than ice cream and have been waiting to try this. He perused the menu while trying to look nonchalant about the company. Em and Shaq, it's a pleasure to see you both again. It's been too long, he greeted. And if I'm not mistaken, this is young Harry Potter. It can't be a Hogsmeade day because it's a Tuesday. He's had a trying year, the headmaster explained, defeating a basilisk and an ancient dark wizard. Some small reward seemed in order. I read about all of that, Slughorn allowed. The Quibbler seemed to be ahead of the prophet for once. Am I correct in assuming that Xenophilus and Pandora's daughter is a classmate at this point? Luna Lovegood started this year. Yes, the headmaster explained, for Harry's benefit. A great shame about Pandora. She would have been great. Too many witches I've mentored never lived to reach their potential. The new arrival fixed Harry with a look of great sympathy. Lily was one of my greatest joys to teach. You knew my mum? Harry asked. Dumbledore had held on to that fact precisely because he knew how bright the boy's expression became at discovering someone that might have more stories about his parents. Certainly, she and young Severus Snape had the friendliest rivalry I've ever seen staying at the top of my class. The large man suddenly shifted gears and declared, I think I'll hazard that expertise in ice cream is transferable to the rest of the lactic arts and try the fettuccine Alfredo. What is everyone else having? Horace Slughorn was a brilliant conversationalist, especially over a meal. As they worked their way through ordering and eating their lunches, he recalled stories of Vance's senior project trying to learn to knit runes, Shacklabolt's happy accident with a pepper-up potion that resulted in him staying up for 3 days with no ill effect through finals, the early days 50 years prior in which Slughorn and Dumbledore vied over the House Cup, and a half-dozen anecdotes about Lily Evans' potions, brilliance, and James Potter's pranks in his class. They'd had a lovely meal, and were most of the way through a very nice dessert of pie topped with Fortescue's finest ice cream when Dumbledore finally managed to segue into the real topic of conversation. Of course, it was only thanks to young Harry's quick thinking and a fang from the basilisk he'd killed earlier that he managed to defeat Acrisides. "Oh," Slughorn asked, drawn in by the tone of secrets being shared. "I took it from the papers that you were still keeping that detail, Mum." "Well, only because we obviously don't want the means of Acrisides' longevity being investigated by just anyone. Those who already know of that grim secret, however, could, of course, be informed of the mechanism." Slughorn gulped his last spoonful of candied pineapple ice cream down as his mind finally added everything up. "No, I certainly wouldn't know anything about dark magics of that kind." "It's not a big deal, sir," Harry shrugged. "Just because you know about them doesn't mean that you'd be crazy enough to want to make one." "You told children about this?" the potioneer asked with only a smidgen of feigned outrage. Given that he's had to destroy two so far and captured another for study, it seemed essential. The old man shrugged, then sprung the trap as Slughorn nodded. "What we need to know is how many more he's likely to run across. I'm frankly surprised he's found 3. The former head of Slytherin tried to dance his way out. 3 wizards mad enough to take such a route. "I'm sorry, but it was only 2, sir," Harry corrected. "1 for Acrisides, but 2 for, well, you know who. He was using tact, not making people he was buttering up flinch from saying Voldemort was tact. Ron would be proud. Albus, I feel like I've been done poorly. It sounds as if you're accusing me of something." "Merlin," Vance tagged in. "All we want to know is whether you have any idea how many of the damned things Tom Riddle planned to make, so we can know if we've gotten them all. No one's accusing you. We just hope you know enough that we can close the book on this madman before he manages to come back." That caught Slughorn out. The fear of Voldemort's return and the seeming offer of amnesty percolated through a mind a bit sluggish from a wonderful meal, and he hazarded, hypothetically, "You know, I consider you one of the most brilliant teachers ever to pass through Hogwarts, Horace." Dumbledore laid it on a little thick, concluding, "Your hypothetical is better than a lesser mind certainty." Glancing over to make sure that the aura in the room looked totally at ease, Riddle's former head of house toyed with his long mustache for a moment before pretending to speculate. "Obviously, I must take you at your word that he's made more than one, which should be enough for any madman. Next stable magical number would be 3, 2 of the damnable devices, and the remainder of the soul with the body. But I suppose you have 2 and you suspect more." "I do," Dumbledore said. He didn't even glance Harry's way, so fixed was he on his old colleague. Harry was a little curious how he was sure they didn't have the only 2. Was someone insane enough to make more than 2? Well, I'd speculate that they might attempt the next magical number and have a 7-part soul. 6 such devices. He sighed. A bit of relief at the information finally being spread was coupled with horror at the realization that Tom Riddle had done it. The next stable number would be 13, and even the gravest madman wouldn't consider the phenomenal risk of slicing his soul that thinly. "I'd hypothesize." "Thank you, Horace," the headmaster said. "That was my surmise as well, but it's helpful to have my work peer-reviewed by someone of your competence." "Of course." "Always happy to consult, old bean," Slughorn nodded, forcing his mien of charm back on. "The Deathly Hallows main quest. What does it mean to be mortal? O collect Voldemort's Horcruxes. 2-6. Destroy the journal. O destroy the diadem. O destroy the locket. O fulfill the prophecy. O optional. Collect the Deathly Hallows. 2-3. Harry took that in, then passed along the information. Whisper to Albus Dumbledore. Another main quest. I'll tell you more about it later, but the site text says the next Horcrux is a locket. The old man simply sent a nod Harry's way, the information not seemingly something he needed Slughorn for. Harry was also going to find out what this prophecy was when they talked. As the headmaster made more small talk to smooth over the trap he'd sprung, Harry simply stared out the window, thinking about the terms of the quest. What was the prophecy? Was he meant to use the Elder Wand? Could they manage to complete this quest before Voldemort showed up again? What was someone that was supposed to have died in Azkaban's fold doing alive and in Diagon Alley? Guys. He interrupted some discussion about sourcing candied pineapple and pointed out of the window at the slender, cloaked figure that was furtively moving into Nocturne Alley, walking from the direction of Gringotts. Her name was clear as day over her head. I'm really sure that's Bellatrix Lestrange. Bellatrix Lestrange, blackguard, level 15 Death Eaters, Slytherin. Let's go. Dumbledore instantly ordered Vance and Shacklebolt, who might have been inclined to waste time asking how Harry could possibly be that certain about a woman in a hood on a random Tuesday. Vance knew the tone and was already moving, reminding everyone, can't apparate in the alley. While that protection had frequently been broken during serious Death Eater raids, it at least usually protected against hit-and-run attacks from lone murderers, and made it possible to chase down thieves and other criminals as they tried to reach an apparition point or a working flue. Then neither can she, the Auror agreed, already out the door and pounding down the stairs. I'll just wait here then, Slughorn said, not all the way freaked out about a supposedly dead Death Eater at large, at least while there was some of the pie left. Shacklebolt was young and fast, and Vance was pushing 40 but still athletic enough, so both were already on the move before they could consider ordering Harry to stay back. And Dumbledore merely warned him, be careful, don't become her target. She's very dangerous, as the boy who lived passed him on the stairs. If it turned into a foot chase, they'd likely leave the old man far behind, but he was the Order's battleship. The Death Eaters knew well that the longer they were tied up in one spot, the more chance that Dumbledore would show up and be ready to end the fight. Bellatrix knew it better than most, but she didn't have any reason to expect that the Auror charging her way was a member of the Order, let alone had backup so close at hand. She only recognized Shacklebolt from the occasional tour of duty at the prison. She wasn't yet feeling her best, after a month-and-a-half recovery from a decade of Dementor exposure, but figured she could take out one young Auror who had rumbled her for some reason. Little Shack wants to play, she sing-songed as she retreated into the shadows of Nocturne Alley, drawing her wand and stowing her precious cargo better so she was free to move. No one could mistake that unhinged voice, so Shacklebolt was suddenly fully on board with Harry's identification. He dodged a cutting curse and moved to the edge of the alley while announcing, Lestrange, you're under arrest. Nope, did that. Wasn't fun. Crucio, she fired off a spell that had the few passers-by on the street screaming and running as the Auror pulled back behind cover to dodge the unforgivable. Didn't think you'd still have that kind of curse in you, Bella, Vance taunted, having flanked to the other side of the alley. The two were of an age to have obviously hated one another at Hogwarts, much less after years of facing one another in the war. Incarcerus. Defindo, Lestrange idly cut the conjured ropes in midair before she was snared. She fired off a couple of wordless spells to keep both crouching for cover as she bantered back. You're one to talk, Emmy. I hadn't heard anything about you, so I assumed you finally fell over and died. But I can help, Confringo. The blasting curse took out a huge chunk of brickwork on the corner of the alley that Vance was hiding behind, forcing her to dive for cover from the explosion, shrapnel, and any follow-up spells that now had line of fire. Lestrange was enjoying getting to cut loose for the first time in years, though the still-mad but tactically oriented part of her mind was telling her that the number of enemies was growing. Vance had always been a skilled opponent and might have learned something in the last decade. She didn't know Shacklabolt's capabilities, and even if she could beat the two, there might be more. She began to fall back, barely failing to notice the flicker of feet under a cloak and the sound of footfalls as Harry ducked spellfire and moved past her. Sneak check succeeded. The Gryffindor in Harry wanted to join the spell duel. He'd been training for it all year, after all. But the part of him that realized that he was basically playing party thief at the moment reminded him that surprise attacks tended to come with a substantial bonus. Stupefy. He incanted, putting all his effort into the spell, from about 3 yards behind Bellatrix's back. To her immense credit as a duelist, she almost dodged. If he'd been any further back, she would have, since she'd started moving on the first syllable, recognizing that she'd missed an opponent. She just didn't realize that one had gotten so close, as she'd checked her back repeatedly and there wasn't anything behind her moments earlier except the wall. And even as the stunning spell hit, the woman was so bloody-minded that she might have hung onto consciousness and pushed through. But she'd whirled to face Harry, and her dodge turned into a drunken stumble as she partially suffered the stunner, which exposed her back directly to Vance and Shacklebolt, whose follow-up spells took her all the way out. 300 combat XP awarded your dad's cloak, Vance nodded, as she cautiously approached, and confirmed the woman wasn't just playing possum. Good casting for a second year. Dangerous, Shacklebolt chided, realizing that he'd have had a hard time explaining that he'd let the boy who lived get killed by an escaped convict in broad daylight. But yes, thanks for the assist. Dumbledore finally strolled up, the entire fight having only taken the time it took him to make it down the stairs, out the front, and across the street. He's a young man of many talents. Now, let's see what caused her to risk so much to come out in public. Shacklebolt rolled the unconscious woman off of the bundle that she'd been protecting, revealing a satchel that clinked and revealed a substantial amount of gold as he lifted the flap. Must have gone to her Gringotts vault. Leadership is going to go spare when they realize the goblins are letting criminals walk right in without alerting us. Ha, not just money, some kind of keepsake, too. I'll just enter this into evidence. Harry was worried when he saw the aura casually reaching in to touch the large golden cup that had been revealed under the galleons, and was more so when he saw the combat log. Golden cup uses suggestion on Kingsley Shacklebolt. Success. Stop, Harry warned, actually risking physically shoving the aura out of the way before his hand could make contact. It's a Horcrux. It can't be. It's clearly an important piece of evidence, Shacklebolt argued, though he wasn't so far gone as to attack a child over it. I'm afraid it must be, Dumbledore concurred, stepping forward and putting a hand on the aura's shoulder to keep him from getting close again. Another of the Founder's artifacts corrupted, if it's Helga Hufflepuff's cup, as I believe. I shall endeavor to be pleased that we've had the good fortune to recover another, rather than aghast at the defilement. The Deathly Hallows main quest. What does it mean to be mortal? O collect Voldemort's Horcruxes. 3-6. Destroy the journal. O destroy the diadem. O destroy the cup. O destroy the locket. O fulfill the prophecy. O optional. Collect the Deathly Hallows. 2-3. It was Vance who voiced the important question. If that thing was safe in her Gringotts vault, we'd have had a very hard time getting it. What was so important that she needed to move it? Chapter 57. Alo Hell. For the final Quidditch match of the year, the math had seemed so simple. Catch the snitch when Gryffindor and Ravenclaw were tied, or Gryffindor was ahead. But then Ravenclaw's seeker, Cho Chang, wizard level 3, had casually given Harry a wink and smile, told him she wasn't going to go easy on him, and made him feel some very strange butterflies in his stomach. The combat log didn't even register that he'd been hit with any kind of distracting attack, but there it was. By the time he'd stopped staring after the pretty girl, Ravenclaw had scored a goal already, and he needed to wait for Gryffindor to catch up. It turned out that the Eagle House had been on a winning streak for good reasons. Their Quidditch team took to the sport with the same single-minded determination the rest of the house used for academics. Especially with the upgraded brooms, they were proving a real challenge, even for the highly talented Gryffindor team. Party Harry Potter. I can catch the snitch any time, guys, but you've got to help score. Fred Weasley replies. Tell us something we don't know. George Weasley replies. Tell us something we don't know. Lee Jordan replies. Keep an eye on Chang. Harry hadn't really taken his eyes off of her, other than to glance at the scoreboard since she'd given him that smile, but he had missed that she was suddenly moving toward the targeting box for the snitch, and the score was sitting at 40-30 in Ravenclaw's favor. Pouring on the speed while Lee commented in the background, Harry managed to cross in front of Cho in a way that forced her to swerve and lose momentum, and with both of them near the snitch it dove down and crossed enough of the stands that she might have lost it. Almost had ye, Potter, she grinned, letting her speed bleed off as she started scanning in the wrong direction for where the tiny golden ball had gone. No hard feelings, he asked, sighing in relief. Ye've had some bad beats, she shrugged, referring to the match he'd missed the previous year and the loss because of the Dementors earlier in that one. So we decided not to be as cutthroat as we normally are. Doesn't hurt your study time, practicing to get this good. Or Captain quizzes us while we do drills, she explained, They'd both drifted higher up and were chatting from a few yards away as they floated over the pitch. "What aboot ye? Here ye're near the top o' your year." "The library whenever I'm not practicing Quidditch, usually," he admitted. Fred Weasley replies. "Harry, what are you doing?" George Weasley replies. "Stop chatting up the bird and get the snitch." Harry really had gotten totally distracted and flicked his eyes over to see that the score had finally tied up 50-50. "Nice chat. Talk later," he told her, and had the presence of mind to start accelerating in the wrong direction toward the scoreboard where he'd just glanced. "Not gonna make it that easy," she shouted jubilantly, kicking her own broom into motion moments behind him. When everyone had the same kind of magical rocket to ride on, it really did make the game a lot more about talent and skill. Harry slightly sandbagged his speed, waited until Cho was pulling ahead of him and going nearly at the limit of what the broom could handle, and then peeled away and started heading for where the snitch actually was. It took her a vital couple of seconds to catch onto the trick, since she was peering ahead trying to spot the flash of gold she thought he'd been after, and that meant everything at the speeds they were flying. She still almost caught up to him as he had to turn left toward the fleeing snitch, but he slapped his palm against it and grabbed hold while she was 3 broom lengths behind. Potter catches the snitch. Gryffindor wins the match and the cup, Lee announced, to the roar of the crowd. "All right," she told him with a rueful smile. "Ye played me fair. This time I didn't make it easy. Next time I'm gonna make it hard. Looking forward to it," he told her honestly, then waved and descended to the rest of his team and the impending massive celebration in the Gryffindor dorms. The Quidditch match was on the Saturday before term exams, and after that hard-fought victory, the tests were barely a challenge. Harry was never going to get the raft of perfect scores Hermione could for memorizing obscure facts and going for extra credit, but he was years ahead on the practical and had his codex to fall back on if he forgot something on the information regurgitation parts. And it was a little weird that he was really wanting to do well. Unlike the year before, he had someone that cared that he got good grades. Sirius didn't care much, since he wasn't one to put much stock in scores rather than results, but he was at least going to look at Harry's report card and make appreciative noises if the scores were high. And that mattered to the kid, it turned out. "I don't know how well I did on history and astronomy," he admitted to his godfather, as the marauders were hanging out in the room of requirement, "but I feel good about everything else, even potions." They'd finally experimented with the beach setting and were well pleased by the room's simulation of the Mediterranean coast. Everyone was sitting around in swimwear, enjoying the sand and lapping of the water. It wasn't bad in the actual outside, for near summer in Scotland, but the best day in the Highlands was still not a prime Riviera experience. If you moved quickly enough while watching the distance, you could tell that everything more than a few dozen yards away was a two-dimensional illusion on the walls, rather than true endless horizon. But the sun, sand, and breeze all felt real enough. It even managed to recreate the sea smell. "You're certainly receiving an outstanding from me," Remus told him, from the blanket next to Sirius. "I just got the lower year grading out of the way. Not totally sure how much input I have on the OWL and Newt exams, since they're administered by the ministry, but I didn't want to risk still having a mountain of grading to do." The werewolf had opted to visit the beach in linen pants and shirt, rather than going topless and showing off his scars. Despite the attempt at covering up, they could see the outlines of a few of the more prominent claw marks through the white fabric. "Are you still done after this term?" Hermione asked, from Harry's other side. "Only I learned rather a lot more from you than from our other instructors, and for continuity of our education, it would be helpful if you were also going to teach next year." Albus finally destroyed the diadem, the defense professor shrugged, "because he has the cup to experiment with. So there's a good chance the curse on the position is now broken. I'm deciding whether I want to risk it. I did enjoy teaching you all." "I hope you stay on, and that you keep doing dueling clubs," Ron said, from further down the line. "Looking forward to this week." The final dueling club of the year was set on the 13th, on a Sunday night that was after the normal exams, but before the upper years started taking newts and owls the next day. The vibe in the great hall after dinner was somewhat electric. 5/7 of the school was basically done for the year, and as relieved as they could be when worried about their scores, while the fifth and seventh years were missing valuable last-second study time and wanted to make it count somehow. "You've all come a long way," Dawlish told everyone, from the exhibition dueling platform that had replaced the professor's table for the evening. "I don't know what my assignment will be for next year, but I hope you all keep this up. A number of seventh years in particular that I didn't think would be ready to try out for the auras when I started, I'll be pleased to see at the ministry this summer. Assuming they have prepared for their potions exam," Snape commented, his voice powerful enough for even that snarky aside to carry across the room. Several of his seventh-year students visibly gulped, glancing at the man. "I don't get why potions is required to be an aura," Ron grumbled quietly. "It all comes down to forensics," Hermione started to explain, but then was cut off by Dawlish continuing. "I think you've all gotten far enough that we're going to mix you up. No more safe partnerships," the aura explained. "Some of the better duelists we may even put against a higher year. Remember, this is about practice, not settling scores with other houses." "What about Potter?" a boy's voice asked from in the crowd. Harry had to check his chat log to find out that it was Fortinbras Tuft, a Slytherin seventh year that was probably still angry with him about a dead relative in Azkaban. "We're going to see if he can crack the 6th years tonight," Remus told everyone with a smile. "Why don't people that want to challenge the boy who lived start queuing up? If enough lower years challenge him, it may be an hour before the matches really start to get interesting." While his friends were getting matched up semi-randomly with people from other houses, most of them with kids in the next higher year, because they were top of their classes at dueling, Harry was starting his grind with the bravest of the third years who, to a one, had all thought up one weird trick that they thought would let them beat him this time. Each of them was wrong, but it turned out he'd finally reached a level or skill ranking such that he'd stopped getting XP from third years. It was awful. The deadly secret of gamification was that attaching rewards to something increased your motivation. But if you ever stopped getting those rewards, your motivation level would drop off a cliff. In theory, dueling should be fun in and of itself. But after that first challenger resulted in a 0 XP award, level too low, Harry found the rest of the third years a horrendous slog. And then he only got half the normal XP for the fourth years as well. Finally, he'd beaten all the challengers from that year and started getting the normal 125 XP for each of the fifth years that challenged him. And it was fair, because unlike the lower years that had each come up with some kind of gimmick to try to get him, the OWL students had genuinely been getting better. And from how they looked at Remus, they all seemed to have it in their heads that beating the boy who lived might be worth extra credit on their defense exams. Nowhere near a level up that would reset his magical stamina by the time he'd finally cleared them out, he desperately messaged, "Whisper to Remus Lupin. I'm almost tapped out. You have to give me a minute or something." The elder marauder clearly considered making him go immediately just as a prank, but Marcus Flint had managed to get in front of Gemma Farley for the 6th-year line this time, and nobody wanted to see the brutish Slytherin Quidditch captain be the one to take out Harry. So Remus said, "I can't imagine most of you were paying much attention for the last little while, and won't while Harry is up against the next batch. So why don't we start clearing up and make some room? Your professors have an exhibition of their own to show you." Flitwick bounced up and down a bit, excited. Snape narrowed his eyes, as if detecting that Remus was helping Harry against the upper-year Slytherins. Dawlish flat out asked, "Thought we were waiting until the end." "Sadly, I think we're not as big a draw as Harry versus the 6th years, and we want to end on a climax," the defense professor shrugged. "Fair enough," Dawlish agreed. As Flitwick started casting some kind of spells that expanded the dueling pitch, and Remus and Snape began to conjure chest-high walls and similar obstacles inside of it, the aura explained, "I've mentioned before that dueling isn't a real spell battle. What we're doing now is showing you more of what a real battle is like. Your charms professor and I will be the aura squad, who are trying to bring in a pair of dark wizards." Remus just sketched a bow while Snape scowled, though possibly simply more at the reminder that he was teaming up with the werewolf, which he, at least, preferred to having to be against him. The twins were already doing a brisk business, taking bets toward the back of the room as the four professors squared up. Harry was mostly oblivious to all of it, as he had found a safe corner to hunker down in and surreptitiously have a snack from his inventory, trying to regenerate as much endurance and magical stamina as he could. His friends told him afterwards that the exhibition was very exciting. The professors were still limiting themselves to spells that weren't likely to cause any kind of lasting harm, but the addition of static defenses and multiple angles of attack really livened up the fight, at least for the kids that hadn't seen that kind of thing before. Harry, already horribly blasé at not quite 13, assumed it wasn't as chaotic as fighting a horde of Inferi or Bellatrix Lestrange. Ultimately, Flitwick and Dawlish had won, owing to Snape having to check himself and figure out something non-lethal to cast, and not really working as a team with Remus. Remus admitted later that he was just happy the defense position curse didn't kick in and see him get hit by a stray spell in a surprisingly deadly way. It had gone on long enough that Harry had recovered most of his endurance and about half his magical stamina, and that would have to be good enough. Because the professors opted to leave the expanded, obstacle-filled course for him to take on the 6th years. With an evil grin, Marcus Flint led off with an object-attracting jinx to try to fling shattered detritus at Harry, already working to conjure aggressive animals to try to pen him in. But the obstacles were a big help for someone with effortless dodge, and the much bigger boy very quickly flat-out lost sight of Harry, who hadn't even had to put on his cloak, just make use of his basic sneak skill. Flint didn't realize he was directing his conjurations at the wrong hiding place until Harry's disarming charm nailed him in the flank from 2 obstructions over. 180 combat XP awarded Hermione seemed to be correct that combat XP was progressing based on the square of the opponent's level times 10, and that in a real combat situation, level 6s would be worth 360. There was a visible bump on Harry's XP bar with each one that he defeated, though he expected he'd need to defeat all the 6th years, and maybe some of the 7th to grind out a level up that evening. As he tried to conserve magical stamina fighting the Slytherins one by one, he at least eked out another point of Newt charms, combat magic, and transfiguration, as well as 2 more in basic dodging. He was also very pleased to have figured out a counter to the spell that Gemma Farley had gotten him with at March's tournament. Marauders. Active, Harry Potter. I don't know how much longer I'm going to make it. Implement plan. Eternal glory. He hated to admit it, but with his magical stamina already bottoming out after the big spells he'd had to use to best all the Slytherins, shielding alone was expensive against powerful attacks. Harry didn't think that he was going to actually manage to roll all the 6th years. Almost certainly, in a real duel, he'd have been able to beat any of them, but in an endurance slog, there was no chance of beating all of them. So it was time to make sure he didn't give away any free points to another house. Fred and George had somehow managed to distract the rest of the waiting 6th years, so they didn't notice that the next block of challengers were all Gryffindor. It wasn't like Harry didn't make a legitimate attempt to beat his own housemates, but he also went a little bigger and used the last of his power to make it good. He managed to take out Joanna King and Alexis Marie to everyone's great surprise. But then Percy Weasley was up. Despite angling for a desk job at the Ministry, he'd gotten 12 owls for a reason. His spell layering was effective, his repertoire was deep, and his attention to detail was second to none. Unlike anyone before, Percy managed to use Harry's dodging against him. There was nowhere to dodge to that wasn't some kind of trap spell. Harry had just enough stamina to shield against Percy's stunner, but the shimmering shell of magic broke with it, and he had nothing left in the tank against whatever was coming next, which was why he was very surprised that the disarming charm the prefect had followed up with skittered off a renewed shield, cast from the wand that Harry was suddenly holding in his left hand, a wand that he shouldn't have even had in his inventory. As he looked down in surprise at the dark, nodule-covered length of the Elder Wand, he felt oddly warm and noticed that his magical stamina bar had reconfigured itself from the normal rectangle to an undulating meter with sides that resembled the Death Stick itself, and that it was refilling faster than he'd ever seen it regenerate before. "Halt!" Dumbledore's voice announced. Had he been in the room the whole time, just waiting, perhaps invisibly, or had he just slipped in during the fight? The old man affected a chuckle, his posture showing the students that no one was in trouble. It seems that, as usual, something interesting has happened around Harry Potter. 10 points to Gryffindor for Percy, Weasley fighting him to a standstill and forcing him to rely on his backup wand. But I think that's probably enough for tonight. Harry absently returned Percy's bow, glancing around as the students started gossiping about the new bit of nonsense the boy who lived had pulled off. None of them had a backup wand. Albus Dumbledore replies, "Perhaps I should have warned you this might happen. Please see me in my office."